Okay, this will be the second part of the Trig sample test for graphing. Okay, so for this one, for cotangent, there is no parentheses, so setting the inside part parentheses equal to 0 would just be 0. Okay, that will be the first one. Here are my values for cotangent: undefined, 1, 0, negative 1, undefined, 1, 0, negative 1, undefined. Once again, these would be the first period. That would be getting into the second period. Okay, so for cotangent, what I want to do is I want to take the period, which is pi, and I would divide by the number in front of x, so my period would be a half. Okay, amplitude would be 3. There will be no vertical shift, so that'll be none. Okay, to find the interval, I want to take the period and divide by 4, which would be pi over 8. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to add 1/8. So 0 plus 1/8 will be 1/8. 1/8 plus 1/8 will be 2/8. Okay, so I'm going to have 1/8 pi. So pi over 8 to start with. 2 pi, that would be pi over 4 for the second amount. Okay, 2/8 plus 1/8 will be 3/8. 3/8 plus 1/8 will be 4/8. So I got 3/8 pi and 1/2 pi, pi over 2. Okay, 3/8 plus, 4/8 plus 1/8 would be 5/8. 5/8 plus 1/8 will be 6/8. Okay, so that'd be 5/8 pi, 3/4 pi. All right, 6/8 plus 1/8 is 7/8. 7/8 plus 1/8 is 8/8. Okay, so that'd be 7/8 pi and 8 pi. Okay, so I'm going from 0 to this. The other thing I gotta do is multiply these all by 3. So this would be 0, negative 3, 3, 0, negative 3. Okay, that came from the amplitude. So I got to go from 0 pi to really 1 pi here. So I'm going to go pi over 2. This is clearly 0 and pi. All right, so I'm going to cut them in quarters. Okay, so this would be 1/4, 3/4. Cut them into eighths: 1/8, 3/8, 5/8, and 7/8. Okay, all right. So at 0, I'm going to be undefined. At 1/8, I'm going to be at 3. At 1/4, I'm going to be at 0. At 3/8, I'm going to be at negative 3. At 1/2, I'm going to be undefined. At 5/8, I'm going to be at 3. At 3/4, I'm going to be at 0. At 7/8, I'm going to be at negative 3, and pi, I'm going to be undefined. Graph looks like this. Okay, so my domain here would be x such that x can't be, my first one's going to be 0 plus, okay, what I want to do is take the period, which is 2 pi, all right, and divide that by 2. All right, so I take the period and divide by 2. So that's going to be pi over 4, okay. Actually, I'm sorry, I don't divide that by 2. It's just going to be a pi period. Hold on. Eraser, it's a little slow. Sorry, I don't divide that by. Okay, I would just do plus the period, which would be pi over 2 times n, where n is an element of integers. Okay, once again, if you plug 1 in there, that's how you get that. Range here would be negative infinity to infinity. All right, moving on to question 7. All right, we got the sine function. Okay, amplitude will be 5. Period will be 2 pi divided by the number in front of x, which would be pi over 2 for the period. The phase shift, if I set that equal to 0, that would be just x is 0. Okay, so phase shift will be 0, vertical shift will be negative 1. Domain for sine is that. Okay, so when I go over here, make sure that you can see that. Yep, it's good. Okay, I would start with 0. Okay, for sine it's 0, 1, 0, negative 1, 0. 1, 0, negative 1, 0. Okay? All right, I'm going to multiply those values by 5. And then I'm going to subtract 1. So it's going to be negative 1, 4, negative 1, negative 6. Okay, negative 1, 4, negative 1, negative 6, negative 1. Okay, I want to take my period and divide it by 4, which would be pi over 8 for the interval. All right, so that's going to be 0 plus 1/8 will be an eighth plus an eighth will be 2/8, 2/8 plus 1/8 will be 3/8, 3/8 plus 1/8 will be 4/8. That gets me my first period, okay? So pi over 8, okay? Pi over 4, 3 pi over 8, pi over 2, okay? Then 4/8 plus 1/8, 5/8, 5/8 plus an eighth, 6/8, 6/8 plus an eighth, 7/8, 7/8 plus an eighth, 8/8. Okay, so that would be pi over 8, 5 pi over 8, 3 pi over 4, 7 pi over 8, and 8 pi over 8. Okay, once again, or I'm sorry, not 8 pi over 8, 1 pi. Okay, so from that standpoint, I'm at 0. All right, since I'm only going to 1 pi, I'm going to go pi over 2, pi, just like before, quarters, 1/4, 3/4, cut those 1/8, 3/8, 5/8, 7/8. Okay, so 0, I'd be down at negative 1. Okay, at pi over 8, I'm at 4. Okay, at pi over 4, I'm at negative 1. At 3 pi over 8, I'm all the way down at negative 6, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. At pi over 2, I'm back at negative 1. At 5 pi over 8, I'm up at 4. At 3 pi over 4, I'm at negative 1. 7 pi over 8, I'm at negative 6. And at pi, I'm at negative 1. So the graph looks something like this. Okay, my range will go from negative 6 all the way to 4. Okay. All right. Moving on to this cosecant problem. My amplitude will be 3. I'm going to set 2x plus pi over 3 over 2 equals 0. So that's 2x equals negative 3 pi over 2. If I divide this by 2, that's going to be x is negative 3 pi over 4. That is my phase shift and my starting value, starting angle. Okay, I want to take the period, which would be 2 pi, and divide it by 2, which would be 1 pi for the period. Okay, to get the interval, I want to take 1 pi and divide it by 4, which would be pi over 4. Okay, all right, my vertical shift here will be negative 4. On top of that, okay, my values for cosecant will be undefined, 1, 0, I'm sorry, undefined, 1, negative 1, undefined, and then that's going to be 1, undefined, negative 1, undefined. Okay, I'm going to multiply everything by 3 and then subtract 4. So that would be 3, negative 3, 3, negative 3. Subtracting 4 will make that negative 1, negative 7, negative 1, negative 7. Okay, so I don't need those anymore. I just operate with those values. Okay, now I'm just going to do the fraction. Okay, so negative 3/4 plus 1/4 is negative 2/4. Negative 2/4 plus 1/4 is negative 1/4. Negative 1/4 plus a 4th is 0. 1/4, I'm sorry, 0 plus a 1/4 is a 1/4. Okay, so I got that second value is negative pi over 2. That second value is negative pi over 2. That undefined value is negative pi over 4. All right, and then I'd have 0 and then pi over 4. Okay, all right, let's do the second period. 1/4 plus a 4th, 2/4, 2/4 plus a 4th, 3/4, 3/4 plus a fourth, 4 fourths, 4 fourths, plus a fourth, 5 fourths. Okay, so that would be pi over 2. This would be 3 pi over 4. This would be 1 pi and 5 pi over 4. Okay, so I'm going from negative pi okay, so 1/4, 3/4, negative 1/4, negative 3/4. Okay, so at negative 3/4 I would be undefined. Okay, at negative pi over 2 I'm at negative 1, which will be there. At negative pi over 4 I'm all the way down at 7, negative 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. I'm undefined, sorry. The negative 1/4 that'd be undefined. At 0 I'm at negative 7. At pi over 4 I'm undefined. Okay, at pi over 2 I'm at negative 1. At 3 pi over 4 I'm undefined. And at pi I'm at negative 7. And then 5/4, whoops, I should have continued. That's just going to be 5/4 right here. I'm going to be undefined. Okay, so my graph looks like this. Okay, and so my domain will be all real numbers, except x can't be my first one, which is negative 3 pi over 4. All right, plus my period divided by 2. Okay, my period here was 1 pi plus pi over 2 times n, where n is an element of integers. Okay, yep, that is right. My range will be a union between negative infinity and negative 7 with a union of negative 1 to infinity. Okay, moving on to the last 2 questions. Okay, all right, so I got cosine. All right, so cosine's going to be 1, 0, negative 1, 0, 1, 0, negative 1, 0, and 1. Okay, take the inside part of the parentheses, set that equal to 0. So that's going to be x over 2 equals pi over 2. If I move that 2 up, that's going to be 2 pi over 2. So my first value will be 1 pi. Okay, then what I want to do for the period is take 2 pi divided by 1/2, which would be 4 pi. Okay, so the period will be 4 pi. Amplitude will actually be 1 here, even though that's a negative. We'll talk about that in a second. My phase shift is 1 pi. My vertical shift is positive 1. Okay, my domain for cosine will be negative infinity to infinity. Okay, now my interval, what I want to do with my interval is take 4 pi and divide it by 4, which would be 1 pi. Okay, so this is actually going to be pretty easy to add here. Okay, so I got 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi, 5 pi, 6 pi, 7 pi, 8 pi, 9 pi. Okay, now the interest in making the graph and then the values, I'm going to multiply all the values by negative 1. Even though I write 1 there, I got to multiply these all by negative 1. So negative 1, 0, 1, 0, negative 1, 0, 1, 0, negative 1. And then I want to add 1, so now I'd be at 0, 1. So now it'd be 2, 1, 0, 1, 2, 1, 0. Yep. Okay. All right, and so in the interest of making this like have some sanity, we're just going to go 1 pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi, 5 pi, 6, 7, 8, 9. Not going to get worried about the halves because I don't have any halves here. Okay, All right, so at 1 pi, I will be at 0. At 2 pi, I'm at 1. At 3 pi, I'm at 2. At 4 pi, I'm at 1. At 5 pi, I'm at 0. At 6 pi, I'm at 1. 7 pi, I'm at 2. 8 pi, I'm at 1. And 9 pi, I'm at 0. That's what the graph looks like. Okay, so my range will go from 0 to 2. Inclusive. Okay? All right, moving on to the last question. Okay? All right, so what I want to do, set this equal to negative pi over 2 to figure out my starting point. So it's going to be negative pi over 2 plus pi over 4, which that just is negative 2 over 4 pi. So I'm going to be at negative, plus that would be negative pi over 4. That would be my starting angle for the tangent. Starting angle will be negative pi over 4 for tangent. We're undefined, negative 1, 0, 1, undefined. Negative 1, 0, 1, undefined. Okay? Now, to find my phase shift, I would set this equal to 0. So that's still my phase shift. Okay? That's still my phase shift for pi over 4. My amplitude will be 2. Okay? My vertical shift will be none. The period will be 1 pi divided by 1. In this case, will be 1 pi. Okay? My interval will be 1 pi divided by 4, which is pi over 4. Okay? So I just got to add those. So let's do that real quick. 1/4, or negative 1/4 plus 1/4 would be 0. 1/4 plus 1/4 would be 2/4. 2/4 plus 1/4 would be 3/4. 3/4 plus 1/4 would be 4/4. Okay? So what I would have here is this would be 0. Oh, whoops, that's not right. Sorry. Hold on. I skipped ahead. That's not going to be right there. Hold on. Let's wait for this. Hold up. 0 plus 1/4 would be 1/4. 1/4 plus 1/4 would be 2/4. 2/4 plus 1/4 would be 3/4. Okay, so this would be 0. This would be pi over 4. This would be pi over 2. And this would be 3 pi over 4. Okay, and then I would just continue it. 3/4 plus 1/4 is 4/4. 4/4 plus 1/4 is 5/4. 5/4 plus 1/4 is 6/4. 6/4 plus 1/4 is 7/4. Okay, so this is going to be 1 pi. This would be 5/4 pi. This would be 3/2 pi. And this would be 7/4 pi. Negative pi over 2. Pi over 2. Pi. Okay. 3 pi over 2. 2 pi. Okay, so cut them in quarters. Negative 1/4, 1/4, 3, 5, 7. Okay. All right, so what I would have here, I'd have to multiply all these values by 2, so that's going to be negative 2, 0, 2, negative 2, 0, 2. Okay, all right, so at negative 1/4, I'm undefined. At 0, I'm at negative 2. At 1/4 pi, I'm at 0. At 1/2 pi, I'm at 2. At 3/4 pi, I'm undefined. At 1/4 pi, I'm at negative, or 1 pi, I'm at negative 2. 5/4, 0. 3/4, 2. And then 7/4, 0. Okay, so for my range will be negative infinity to infinity, and my domain will be x such that x can't be, my first asymptote is at negative pi over 4, okay, plus n times the period, which is 1 pi, where n is an element of integers. Okay, so that's a long sample test. You take what you need out of that. All right, practice that up. You'll have about 8 questions to do on the formatives, probably a little bit less to do on the summatives.